eastern shores of Cook Inlet can be found an industry and a way of life which has existed for generations. Since the early 1800s, fishermen have set netted on these shores. The Upper Cook Inlet commercial salmon fishery is one of the oldest in Alaska. From its origin through 1896, gill nets and beach seines were used to harvest salmon. From 1897 until the mid-1940s, fish traps accounted for most of the commercial catch. Traps were outlawed at statehood, and today set and drift gill nets are the major gear in use. For the past 2 years, the Cook Inlet commercial salmon fishery has been worth over $100 million, making it the second most lucrative fishery in Alaskan waters, just behind Bristol Bay. In the past 2 seasons, the salmon returns to Cook Inlet have far exceeded predictions. Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologist Paul Roosh says there are several reasons for the extraordinary returns.
And I think we had everything kind of come together. Certainly last year it happened. We had returns per spawner on the order of 15 or 16. That's extraordinarily high. If it's going to happen again this year, then obviously that condition persisted for another year. But that's what's basically happening, was good parent year stock to begin with, finding incredibly favorable conditions in which to reproduce.
Drift gill netters, those who cast their nets from boats far offshore, account for about 60% of the annual salmon harvest. About 350 set net permit holders, meanwhile, fish from the eastern shore, up to 1.5 miles. Each permit allows the setting of 3 nets. Each net is anchored to the shore or between buoys and extends 210 feet. A net's depth may range between 10 and 17 feet, and each net must be 600 feet from the other. Upper Cook Inlet is one of the most controversial and difficult fisheries to manage. Every May through September, 5 species of salmon pass through the inlet on their way to spawning grounds in Kenai Peninsula and Matanuska-Susitna Valley lakes. The commercial fishery in Cook Inlet targets the sockeye, or the red salmon. But with the reds also come silvers, kings, pink, and chum salmon. The kings and silvers are prize catches for sport fishermen, but some are incidentally caught by set net and drift fishermen during the red harvest. That incidental catch has led to an ongoing controversy: who should get how many of which salmon? Until the early 1960s, the commercial fishing season spanned most of the summer. In 1965, the opening of the commercial season was delayed until the 3rd week of June. In 1973, commercial fishing during the early run of king salmon was eliminated. Finally, in 1978, to appease sport fishermen, the Upper Cook Inlet Salmon Management Plan was adopted by the Board of Fisheries. It limited commercial fishing to take place between July 1st and August 15th. Under the plan, commercial fishermen who once enjoyed a nearly 6-month season now fish only 6 weeks, 2 days per week unless granted an emergency opening. Outside of those 6 weeks, the fishery is managed primarily to benefit sport fishermen. The Eastside set net fishery stretches along 59 miles of beach from Boulder Point to Ninilchik. These set netters generally account for about 37% of the total Cook Inlet harvest. Of the roughly 350 permit holders today, 90% are Alaskan residents, many who depend on set net fishing as their sole source of income. In 1987, a record catch of 10.5 million salmon was worth $101 million to Cook Inlet fishermen. In 1988, preliminary estimates say the harvest will be worth a new record, $118.9 million. Well, 1987 and 1988 have seen all-time high numbers of fish caught at record prices. Many fishermen remember leaner years, such as 1984, when the total Cook Inlet catch was worth $17 million. With a 6-week season, somewhat unpredictable fish runs, and even more unpredictable weather, plus substantial investments required to purchase sites, boats, and equipment, fishing Cook Inlet is a gamble for many. One set netter who has taken a chance on the fishery is Eric Barnes. He's fished the beaches since 1962.
I have always liked challenging things, and the surf is a challenging thing, and I like working outdoors, and I like working with my head, and the innovations that we try to do give me a chance to do both of that.
Tim Keener's family has fished on the beaches since the early 40s, and Keener, now 33, has fished all his life.
I don't know, some people like to gamble, I like to fish. I think the two maybe are similar. It's also, I think it takes a lot of skill to fish, and you know, most commercial fishermen have a lot of pride in what they do, and they've developed it for years. I mean, I learn something new every year when I fish out here.
A few weeks of the season can spell success or financial ruin for a fisherman. When the fish come, they must be harvested, no matter what time of day, no matter what the weather, or the dangers it presents on the unforgiving waters of Cook Inlet.
Yeah, it can be real dangerous. I've had several friends that have actually drowned in this business, but, you know, we keep going back, and the main thing that you have to remember is that, you know, life becomes, revolves around fishing, but the most important thing is not to risk your life for fishing. It's not worth it, you know, just for the sake of getting out there and making a buck. You've got to make decisions and take the cautious approach.
Commercial fishing is one of the most dangerous occupations in which to work. While some nets are set from shore, many others are set further out and require tending in dories. Chris Monfort married into a fishing family. Her husband's family has fished the beaches since the 1920s. Still, with that experience, she worries every time her family heads out to pick the nets.
And when they open it for fishing, no matter what, you've got to be ready and get there, because once those fish go by, you don't get the second chance. And so if it's rough and stormy, you do the best you can. Some people take out dories. We're not like that. Our main goal is safety first, and everything else comes secondary after that. And if it's really bad, we'll just fish from the beach.
Set netter George Nice says the danger is part of the excitement which lured him into fishing 9 years ago. This summer, he learned firsthand the pains fishermen will go to when the fish hit, as he broke several ribs during one fishing period.
I consider commercial fishing a really dangerous occupation. There are a lot of times that you're in a life-threatening situation. I do enjoy the rough water. I guess the challenge of the sea, but you have to have a tremendous respect for it, or you can get you in trouble.
Even though the actual fishing season spans only 6 weeks, weeks when fishermen and the crew must be on call 24 hours a day, preparations for the season begin in the spring. And as Mike Trujillo, a set netter on California Beach, knows, when fishing season opens, the work is literally non-stop.
Commercial fishing, it's a way of life. It's not a sport. It's not a hobby. It's not just a summertime thing that you can just do. It's a challenge. It's hard work. It's about the hardest work you can do.
Still, despite the physical challenge, the dangers of Cook Inlet tides and the weather, along with the unpredictability of the fish runs, set netting is a way of life for the 350 permit holders and hundreds more who serve as the crew during the harvest. Of the record value of the 1988 harvest, set netters accounted for about $43 million. With 90% of set netters being Alaska residents, the money they've earned will remain in the Alaskan economy. Set netter Gene Palm.
And anybody that flies the beaches when people are fishing should realize that set netting is big business. Involves a lot of people.
Commercial fishing on the Kenai Peninsula is the second most important economic activity, right after oil. Fishing provides 20% of the local economy, a fact well known to Kenai Peninsula Borough Mayor Don Gilman.
Well, there are some families that's their business, particularly those people who work on beach sites. I can think of a number of families that they just don't do anything else. That is their business.
The city of Kenai has always depended on commercial fishing. Former Kenai Chamber of Commerce Executive Director Sue Carter.
When those Russians came in 1791 to the Kenai, they came upon a fishing village at the mouth of the Kenai River. And that's Kenai.
It's estimated that each dollar paid to fishermen turns over about 6 times in the peninsula and the Anchorage economies to buy fishing gear, food, homes, pay taxes, and to provide everyday living expenses for many families.
As the winter goes along and you go in and you're buying things in the stores, many of the proprietors of the stores will say, I'm certainly glad you guys are here all year round because we can't, the sport fishing is fine, and we do get some money from them through the summer, but you guys here all winter and you keep us going.
And once the fish leave the nets, the profits continue to grow at the processing plants. Nearly 3 dozen processors provide hundreds of jobs for Alaskans. Clyde Sterling is the general manager of Kenai Packers, one of the larger peninsula processors.
And I've seen a change in the recent years from when the fish plants, at least in my perception, were kind of second-class citizens, where oil was king, and the fish people were just those places down there that smelled bad, and you didn't really want to deal with them. To the point now that the city council and a lot of members of the community are all saying, oh, well, we're really gung-ho on fish. Suddenly it's kind of the in thing to be.
Gary Irvin manages another peninsula processor, Seafoods from Alaska.
Our employment has grown from, in '84, about 10 people to this last year of 258, and probably this year 450. And our permanent jobs have grown from about 4 or 5 permanent jobs when we started in '84 to this last year of 55 permanent jobs, and this current year probably 120 permanent jobs year-round.
For the past 2 years, the competition by processors to attract workers has been intense. Like Irvin and Sterling, smaller processors also hire locally, but the number of jobs often exceeds the local labor pool. Kenai Packing's manager Mike Sawinski says plenty of jobs have been available for those who wanted to work.
We only have a limited labor pool on the Kenai Peninsula, and with the increased production from the last couple of years' harvest, other plants, we've all been trying to get as many locals as we possibly could.
This year, sockeye brought in record prices, peaking at about $2.85 per pound, almost twice the price paid in 1987. After processing, each fish may bring up to 60% more when sold to Alaska's largest customer, Japan. The reason for the record prices was a strong Japanese market and lower than expected fish runs elsewhere in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. While the primary processing of salmon, the heading and gutting, provides thousands of jobs, it's the secondary level of processing which some say may offer even greater potential for increased employment. Irvin Seafoods from Alaska is involved in primary processing, but also goes a step further and provides the actual consumer end product, such as cold and hot smoked salmon, skinless, boneless canned salmon, and salmon jerky. As the only secondary processor on the peninsula, he sells mainly to the Pacific Rim and Europe.
It's extremely important, but it's at its infancy. And what I mean by that is that if people think it's important now, if what happens to it occurs over the next 5 years in the secondary processing value-added areas that our company is driving at, and I hope others do, instead of 50 new jobs over this year, there should be 500 to 1,000 new permanent jobs here in the Kenai Peninsula.
Record salmon returns have provided a strong economic boost to the local economy. But record returns also have provided an ongoing controversy over who should get how many of which salmon. Set netting has existed in Cook Inlet since the early 1800s, sport fishing on the Kenai Peninsula only since the early 1970s. Borough Mayor Don Gilman remembers when there was virtually no sport fishing on the Kenai River.
Spence DeVito was the first really well-known guy, and he had a couple big boats, and he'd pull a pile full of people and float down the river, and they'd catch a bunch of kings, and that word went out of this country like wildfire.
Since the mid-1970s, the battle between sport fishermen on the Kenai River and commercial set netters on the beaches has raged. While set netters fish for sockeye, they also catch a comparatively small number of kings, many of which are bound for the Kenai River. There's no way to separate the salmon runs. The Kenai River Sport Fishing Association, led by Anchorage businessman Bob Penny, wants the nets pulled out of Cook Inlet. Penny contends that set netters catch too many trophy kings, but set netters disagree. Fisherman Eric Barnes.
The king run grew to what it is with us fishing. And there's a 5-mile wide sanctuary in the mouth of Kenai, and the fish, most of the fish enter pretty much directly through that 5-mile wide corridor. About 30% travel to beaches, and we catch 25 to 30%. But with catching 25 to 30%, we're never going to devastate the king run.
Penny's contention that set netters are depriving anglers of trophy kings is not supported by the facts. Trophy kings must be at least 75 pounds. The world record is 97 pounds. Fish and Game statistics show the average king caught in a set net weighs less than 30 pounds. And those same figures, according to fishery biologist Paul Roosh, show the king runs are not endangered by commercial fishing.
Every indication is that king salmon run is quite healthy, currently. No indication that recent harvest patterns have been detrimental to that stock, either in the sport fishery or in the commercial fishery.
In fact, according to Fish and Game research leader Ken Tarbox, set netters harvest a small portion of the king run, about 20% of the total late run in 1988. The majority of the run remained for anglers in the river.
And the east side set nets historically have only taken 20 to 30% of the king return in terms of the last few years that we have data. So that's certainly not going to threaten the king stocks at their present levels of return.
In 1988, sport fishermen caught a new record of 17,500 late-run Kenai kings, 40% more than the record catch a year earlier. The record Kenai king catches in 1987 and 88 came despite nearly continual set net fishing both years. Also in 1988, the sport fishermen took 11,600 kings from the early Kenai run and over 10,000 from the Kasilof River. In all, sport fishermen landed over 46,000 kings from peninsula waters, compared to just over 12,000 which were caught in set nets.
One thing that is kind of nice is in the historical record, when sockeye are strong, kings also tend to be strong. And I think that may have to do with the rearing environment again here in the Kenai River drainage, and they may track, and so this problem of biological concern may in fact be less than the allocative problem or situation.
In 1988, the incidental king catch made up less than 0.5% of the total east side set net salmon harvest. In one last effort to appease sport fishermen, many set netters voluntarily released live kings from their nets at a significant financial loss. As a result, the incidental set net king catch in 1988 was down over 40% from 1987. Set netters Mike Trujillo and George Nice let many of the kings through their nets.
I'm returning all my kings that are alive. If they're alive in my net and they just hit and I can get over there, I get them out. That's not to say they're not going to get caught in my neighbor's net, but still, I don't believe that we should have to do that. There's no problem with the kings. If there is a problem with the kings, it's in river.
I wish that we didn't catch kings. I wish there was a way not to do that, but it doesn't seem like anybody's come up with a good way. Although this year we are releasing our live kings, and I'm hoping that a lot of those do make it back to the Kenai River.
But even with record catches, Bob Penny and the Kenai River Sport Fishing Association have proposed a new scheme to remove set nets from Cook Inlet. It's called Project Us. The plan proposes to remove set nets from Cook Inlet by 1991, allowing all fish into the river. Sport fishermen would then have first crack at all the salmon, and the leftovers from the red run would be harvested by a fish trap 40 miles upriver. Set netters would then be paid for not fishing based on their historical value of their catch. Set netters have vowed to fight the plan, asking how can compensation be paid for the loss of a heritage and a livelihood for their families. Project Us would also lower the quality of fish sold commercially, and even the biologist paid by sport fishermen to develop the scheme admits it would produce environmental dangers to the river, the fish, and the wildlife. As president of the Kenai Peninsula Fishermen's Association, Tim Keener sums up the feelings of his membership.
It's just a big scam to put us out of business, and, you know, in his mind, the sooner the better. And I don't think he's doing it for the king salmon or anything else. I think he's doing it for the satisfaction of Bob Penny. He's got some kind of a personal vendetta against the set netters along here and commercial fishermen in the inlet, I think. I think it's just he's got a dislike for commercial fishermen, period. So I think it's time people just stop listening to the man and let's get on with our lives and let's have some good fisheries. I mean, this resource is going to be here forever if we take care of it, and we can't leave it up to people like Bob Penny. You know, he's just not going to take care of it. It's obvious.
Project Us is not the first attempt made to eliminate commercial fishing in Cook Inlet. Since adoption of the Upper Cook Inlet Management Plan in 1977, sport fishermen have attempted to reduce the commercial season even further, an effort the set netters have resisted.
We've been restricted down to, you know, just a few weeks now in order to make our livings, and there's no reason for another restriction, and I think we've pretty much given up all that we can give. You know, we're bending over backwards for some of these people that are in the sports community, and it seems like the more you give, the more they want. So, you know, it's my position and the position of the association I represent that we're not going to take any more restrictions, period.
On 3 occasions, set netters have been forced to resort to court action to overturn restrictions on openings lobbied for by sport fishermen. They won twice. The Kenai River Sport Fishing Association has now filed a lawsuit in court seeking to have the State Board of Fisheries alter its management plan for Cook Inlet so that sport fishermen would have top priority.
So you mentioned Bob Penny. As far as people like that, I think that's a real kind of a dark cloud on the fishery right now, that people like that are actually running around spreading propaganda against commercial fishermen and our way of life. And to me, they've somehow gotten off track along the line here. They don't understand Alaska's fisheries anymore.
With record catches in both the commercial and sport fishery, set netters have a hard time sitting still when their livelihood is threatened.
You know, they've had record catchers in the sport fishery consistently now, year after year. They break a record, the same with commercial. So, you know, I'm real happy, and I can't understand it when people like Penny aren't happy. I don't know exactly where he's coming from, but like I said, I think that he doesn't really understand Alaska's fisheries anymore.
I'm not a quitter, so I feel like, or always felt that we could beat this guy, and would just teach the people, educate the people, yeah, and the fishermen. The fishermen aren't very educated when it comes to their own political matters. But so, once we started educating the people, it's amazing how they understand what's going on right now.
The referee of the dispute, at least for the time being, has been the Board of Fisheries and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. While Bob Penny accuses the department of mismanaging a resource, commercial fishermen say, despite occasional differences, Fish and Game has managed well, as demonstrated by both record sport and commercial harvests.
We have the best management probably in the whole country, and certainly we have good management. Haven't always agreed with them, but I really think they've done an excellent job.
And Tim Keener, with many years of experience behind him, agrees with Eric Barnes.
You know, as far as the fish and game management goes, it's great too. They know the facts, and the fact is that the king runs are healthy. We're not hurting them. Over 2/3 of those kings go in the river every year.
I'm glad I'm a fisherman and not a biologist. Yeah, I don't envy their job. And yes, I do think they're doing a very good job. I feel like you know, our runs are increasing yearly. They have to deal with drifters, set netters, and sport fishermen and all the other components in fishing, but I do personally think they're handling it very well.
Paul Roosh is the area management biologist for Cook Inlet Fisheries. While the decision over who gets to fish when is a team effort between commercial and sport fish biologists, if there is a conflict, Roosh has the final say.
What's good for one person is going to be bad for the next, and that's the first thing you learn when you do this job, is that if you're constantly just trying to please people, you'll never win. You're going to have somebody on your back all the time. So basically what you do is take your allocative direction from the Board of Fisheries in terms of the management plan, and then you just manage fish stocks as best you can.
Though a large portion of the money spent by sport fishermen in south central Alaska is spent outside the state, commercial fishermen do recognize there are benefits from both a healthy sport and commercial fishery. Both are important to the Kenai Peninsula economy. Former Kenai Chamber Director Sue Carter.
Anything that would inflict a closure or perhaps a slowdown of that industry is going to affect a lot. There'll be a domino effect, I can see it, and it'll just head right on down.
For the set netters of Cook Inlet, who say they sometimes feel like an endangered species, many hope the traditions and values they have learned on the beach will be passed down to their families for generations to come.
As we started having children, we're trying to involve them in it, and we could see that they also really enjoyed it and want to be down there. And so, the more we see this, the more we like it, and we like to work with our children and like to have them see our work habits and work ethics, and they learn along with us.
Good working experience. It teaches people teamwork from the littlest guy on up to the oldest, and it involves not only the immediate family, it involves extended family, and there is a real community, even if it is, say, just a community, a site-specific community. And I think anybody you talk to that works with us will sense that.
You're teaching your kids something that they can use when they get older. I guess that's probably one of the biggest things with us. It's so family-oriented. And all my kids have been raised right here on the beach. They all know how to fish. And they'll be teaching their kids someday, hopefully.
It'll be up to the kids. They'll make that decision. I'm not going to force it on them. Just like my parents never forced it on me. I love to fish ever since I was old enough to remember. So, either they'll like it or they'll hate it. That's usually the way it goes.
Set netting on the eastern beaches of Cook Inlet. It's taken place since the early 1800s. And as long as the fish continue to return, so too will the east side set net fishermen.